Well, a little technical difficulties to begin this one. Apparently the countdown timer restarted at 59. I got super confused as to what was happening. Anyway, this is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, December the 15th, 2024. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks. Oh, Michael, I do not hear you at all.
Can't hear me?
Oh, now I can hear you. There we go. That's much better. We did not get a chance to say hi before the podcast, so hi. How are you?
I've been a little under the weather, so.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, today's the first day that I could fully eat stuff. So.
Oh no! All right. Well, I see it hasn't prevented you from accessing your stock of white wine.
Man, missed it.
Let's start by talking about Syria today, shall we? This is a really interesting case study in about change in the Middle East, and I'm not entirely sure what the lessons are. This guy that is basically the top guy. It's not him. This is Hayat Tahrir Sham. This is the guy we're talking about right here. He has gone by the name of Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani. However, that's not his real name. He has now released his real name, which is in here somewhere. Oh, thank you. Al-Shara is his last name.
Abu is what Arabs use to signify a war name. It's like warrior, blah blah blah. So Abu al-Baghdadi is the warrior from Baghdad, that kind of thing.
There we go. That's his real name, Ahmad al-Shara, or Ahmad al-Shara, if you want to Americanize it. This guy has an interesting past. He fought against the United States in Iraq. He spent some time in Abu Ghraib. The United States government still lists him as a terrorist. He's got a $10 million bounty on his head. However, a couple of years ago, after seeing what happened with both Al-Qaeda, then in Iraq, and then seeing what happened with ISIS especially, where, ISIS was this one thing, and then it kind of devolved into these warring factions because, each of the other factions was insufficiently militant. Radicals always break off into smaller and smaller fractions because...
The Judean People's Front.
Yeah, the People's Front of Judea. Yeah.
Splitters!
Yeah, the same kind of thing happened. And so a couple of years ago, he came back and he said, look, I'm Syrian. The important thing to do is to get rid of Assad in Syria and to build a country in Syria that is not a repressive fucking hellhole. And so I don't think the leopard has completely changed his spots.
No.
He's an Islamist. He may be a more moderate Islamist, but he's an Islamist. And there is no chance that he is going to create some sort of liberal Western democracy.
No.
In Syria.
No, he might moderate towards, say, Iran.
Yeah, well, he's not a big friend of Iran.
No, he's not, because he took out their client states.
So that's a good thing. He talks a lot about, and I think they had a quote here, Syria deserves a governing system that is institutional, where not one where a single ruler makes arbitrary decisions. And he says, don't judge by words, but by actions. So I don't know, because we've never seen, at least not in our lifetimes, what a Syria governed by institutions look like. I think I have a lot of questions about what those institutions are going to be. I don't think Syria is going to be any sort of liberal democracy of any kind, but maybe it's possible that this guy who has said he rejects this global jihad thing. He says, we're trying to create a country in Syria. We're not going to export a revolution. He said, I think 2 days ago, that Syria is exhausted by war after 14 years. They should be. We can't afford another war with anyone, not Israel, no one. We need to rebuild our country. So, despite this guy's past, and despite the fact that he's still running around with a $10 million bounty on his head from the United States as a terrorist, I mean, it's hard to conceive of anything that would be worse than the Assad regime has been for the past 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, dictatorship is, whether it's benevolent or not, is still dictatorship.
And the Assad dictatorship was anything but benevolent.
Yeah, exactly. It was self-serving. It wasn't really Islamic. It was just a kleptocracy.
Yeah, well,
which is why they get along so well with Russia.
It was a Ba'athist republic, which technically means it was some, off-brand of socialism.
Mm-hmm.
Although socialism, in which the Assad family were the big rulers. But, I mean, you're talking about a country where, like Hafez al-Assad, they had a revolution in Hama, and he just fucking gassed the city and killed 40,000 people without really giving it a second thought. I mean, it really is a horrific, brutal country. Over the last year, perhaps 500,000 Syrians have been killed. It has been a really bad place to live. If it turns into a moderate Islamist, and don't even ask me what that means, by the way, if it turns out not to be run by whack jobs, and they decide to create some institutions, which I'm almost sure will be some form of Islamic institutions.
The Islamic nation, I guess. I don't know, but
could it be worse than what they've already had?
I mean, it could be. Well, like you said, judge the actions, not the words. So if they aren't trying to export jihad, if they're not working with Iran or any of their proxies in order to dominate the region, yeah, I mean, that does say something. I mean, look at Egypt with al-Sisi. That's nominally a military-run country, right? But it's fairly moderate.
Yes, even though it is a military dictatorship and it is as brutal in its own way as any other, it's not Assad level brutality.
No, not at all. Not even close.
And I think what has been interesting is that now that al-Jawlani and the other guy who has the other major force that overthrew the Syrian government, now that they've taken over, what we haven't heard are a bunch of reprisals, a bunch of revenge killings,
ethnic cleansing,
a bunch
genocide,
of looting. It seems to have been a remarkably smooth transition, which I wouldn't have bet money on. And a lot of the Syrians themselves are saying, we were kind of silent under Assad. We were kind of scared. We're not going to do that anymore. We are going to have a voice in our government. Now, I don't know if that's unwarranted optimism or not, but a Syria that is not an Iranian client, that is not a source of international terror, is probably a Syria we can live with.
If it's one that we don't have to worry about meddling in the region, yeah, that would be much preferable. Now, it doesn't make me less sympathetic to the Syrian people who have to suffer under, this sort of regime. But as far as American interests, yes, that would definitely reduce our things to worry about.
I wonder sometimes whenever regimes like this, if it runs the way that Al Jalani or Al Shara, I guess is his name really, if they are going to run it like he says, I mean, it's definitely going to be some sort of Islamic republic. It's
Yeah.
not going to have the same sort of institutions that we're willing to look at with a lack of suspicion. And it's probably not going to have the same level of civil rights and what have you that we expect in the West. I'm not
It's probably
entirely.
going to be run if what he is saying is true and he wants to institutionalize. I mean, essentially, you're looking at what a theocratic welfare state.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that that's something that most Arabs would have a problem living under.
I mean, given the other options, no.
Yeah, I mean, as long as the rules aren't too onerous and as long as they don't go, full Taliban, um, I think most Arabs would probably welcome that sort of government.
Be a nice change.
Yeah, I mean, for us here in the West, it would be completely intolerable to us. And there would be a lack of civil rights protections that we would find appalling. Arab countries don't have that same concept of civil rights. I mean, they don't, to the extent that they understand liberalism, they understand it as the force that breaks apart families, that allows homosexuality, that, I mean, from their worldview, there is very little good that comes out of traditional Enlightenment liberalism. And so I don't think they would expect it. What I do think that they would expect is just not to be dragged out from their homes in the middle of the night and thrown into one of those big rock crushing machines, just because they pissed off the ruling family. And that may be enough.
For now.
What I found very interesting is that Al Jalani, or Al Shara, as his real name is, he just explicitly said, no, we're not going to war against Israel. He just took it off the table.
That's a very interesting change, because, well, especially given recent events, that would be an incredibly welcome change.
At the same time, the Israelis have talked about, or have actually approved, expanding some of their settlements in the Golan Heights. So it looks like from the Israeli point of view, returning the Golan Heights to Syria is just completely off the table.
It's been off the table.
Well, yeah, since 1973, it's been off the table.
That was never, ever going to happen. The Golan Heights are actually, I've been there, and it's nothing like a war zone. It's actually a vacation spot. It's sort of like where people might have their country homes that they go visit, for a month or something, and
right.
have family vacations or whatever.
Right. The trouble with them is geographical, which is that if you have decent,
because they border Lebanon and Syria,
and if you have decent artillery, that's exactly where you want to site it to get as far into Lebanon or Israel as you possibly can.
Yeah, it's just it's not highly populated either. Like I said, it's more of a vacation area than anything.
Yeah, so it's just been interesting to watch, and it one of the things that it tells us, and we've really seen this time and time again. I mean, whenever totalitarian rulers fall, they look like they're invincible right up into the last 48 hours.
Yeah, gradually, then suddenly.
Yeah, I mean, there may be problems, and then there's some precipitating event, and the whole thing comes crashing down because everybody around them departs the regime like rats leaving a sinking ship. Same thing. I always think of Romania.
Right, with Ceausescu.
Yeah, Nicolae Ceausescu went out and gave his annual big speech that he always gives, and everybody always sat and silently listened to him harangue them for 2.5 hours every year. And this year they just started to say boo, and 48 hours later they'd shot the son of a bitch.
Yeah. It
All the,
didn't actually get much better in Romania for quite a while, actually. But
no, it didn't, but they shot that son of a bitch real quick, and all it took
yeah,
was some smartass in the crowd going boo,
right.
and
Yeah,
oh, somebody else doesn't like this asshole. Well, boo,
yeah,
boo too. And
right.
the whole thing fell apart in 48 hours. It just went, I mean, it just went completely crazy. And the army shot him. The people,
Hmm.
the people who he had basically given all the jobs to, who he had promoted, who had, they were the first ones to grab rifles and say, hey, you want us to shoot this guy? Well, shoot, let's have a quick trial and shoot him. And they did. And
Yes, they did. Tore down his statue and
and
just
of course,
ran roughshod.
we've seen the same thing. All the Assad statues got torn down.
Hmm.
It's over. Which is weird to me because for my entire life, well, at least that part of it that I can remember, because I don't really remember being much of a devotee of Syrian-U.S. relations prior to 1967.
You weren't big into a Syrian political.
Yeah, I wasn't a 3-year-old Syrian political analyst, but I mean, the Assad families run that country like their own personal dog kennel since I was 3 years old,
Yeah, that's exactly what they did.
and now it's just over. And
It's kind of funny because it wasn't even that different. Well, at least economically and as far as authoritarian, than the way the Shah ran Iran before the Iranian Revolution. Um, uh, Reza, whatever his name was,
Reza
um,
Pahlavi.
Pahlavi. Uh, I mean, they allowed a lot of social freedom. You always see those, before and after pictures from places like Afghanistan in the 60s and Iran in the 70s. And then, today, um, there wasn't as much of the religious fervor from Assad. There was, you could certainly get a drink in Syria. Um, you know, there were certainly some modesty expectations for women, etc. But that the social stuff wasn't what was really enforced. It was much closer to your classic authoritarian Soviet socialist regime.
Yeah, well, they're all gone now. All of the Ba'athist regimes are now done. The Egyptian army tossed out the Ba'athists after Nasser. Saddam Hussein is gone. Assad was the last one standing, and now that's gone as well. I do wonder, though, you mentioned those pictures of Kabul in 1966 or, Iran, Tehran in 1977, where they looked like, relatively normal modern countries.
Westernized, yeah, right.
And you look at them now, and they look different. They are what we would consider a devolution back to the 16th or 17th century in terms of their modes of dress and governance.
Yes, that's exactly right. Really, to the 15th century, which they wanted to return to forever.
So I guess the real question is, can the Syrians keep these jihadis satisfied with just rebuilding Syria? There's something.
I mean, that's going to be the struggle, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's something exciting when you're a young man about running around in the hills with a rifle shooting people, and there is something somewhat less exciting by saying, okay, well, now you're in charge of municipal water infrastructure. It's not the same, especially when you've been running around in the hills with a rifle thinking you're doing God's work. It's hard to get that same level of enthusiasm whenever you are the third district manager of sanitation collection.
It's funny because my kids earlier tonight when we were having dinner, we're, we're having a conversation about, you know, what do you think are the jobs that like kids never dream of growing up to do? And it was exactly those sorts of middle management bureaucratic jobs, especially when, you know, every boy dreams of being a football star, a baseball star, and a cop or an astronaut. you know?
Look, this is universally true. Combat is horrific, no matter how you look at it, and it's a horrific experience to have to go through. And all you have to do is a movie that won the Oscar in 1946, The Best Years of Our Lives, which was a story of three different veterans coming home after World War II. And now all of a sudden you're not flying bombers over Germany. You're not crawling through the mud and snow in Bastogne. Now you're home selling used cars.
Doing quality control checks on cans of tuna fish.
Yeah, it's that no matter how bad it got when you were on the front line, there was at least a sense of mission that you were doing something that was existentially important to your country.
Absolutely. And, the potential for heroics, knowing that you had true defined purpose. I mean, all
Brotherhood.
those things are great until until you're facing the other side of a 50 cal.
Yeah, those things don't go very far when there's MG 42 rounds coming at you at 1100, 1200 rounds a minute. But this experience of violence that has gone through the Middle East, and not just since 2001. I mean, the Middle East was a hellhole for 30 years prior to that as well.
For 7 centuries.
Yeah, I mean, when all you have known is military struggle. I mean, it's one thing like we did in World War II. You grab an 18-year-old, you send him off to Camp Toccoa, Georgia, or Fort Dix, New Jersey, or wherever. You train them for 6 or 8 months. You ship them off to England. They train for another year, tramping through the pastures and the fields. And then they do, 212 combat days. And then it's over. And then they get to go back home. And that was a hard transition for a lot of Americans. Now imagine the transition is you're 26 years old. All you've known is combat for basically your entire life since you were 14, 15. So you spent more than half of your life in combat, and now it's over. And there's no need for you to run around with a rifle anymore. How many of those people are willing to go back to civilian lives? It's not 212 combat days. It's 12 years of combat.
Yeah.
What kind of toll does that take? And what does that imply for how many of these people are going to be willing to return to civilian life, or how many of them are going to want to go across the border into Lebanon or wherever and try to recapture that sense of purpose with some other militia?
I mean, mercenaries aren't restricted to the Western world. I mean, that's everywhere. Some people just enjoy that type of life.
Yeah, and when it's all you've ever known, again, going back and being the deputy chief of tax assessment in Hama is probably doesn't seem like a very rewarding career.
Yeah. Would it be a rewarding life? Like she got a much higher survival rate.
Yeah, you have to wonder how many of these people even have a grasp of what a normal life looks like.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the Palestinians, I think, are an extreme case. I mean, they're truly a death cult. Um, and unfortunately, because the Arab world, the Middle East, uh, aside from maybe Lebanon and Israel, are and Jordan are incredibly tribal. Um, and so there's no real sense of hope or joy. There are imams that are like, well, no, no, no. Islam is serious. There is no joy. It's a serious thing. There are no jokes. There is no joy and wonderment. There is the serious business of doing God's will. And that's it. And when you've grown up under generation upon generation of that, um, the concept that life is sacred or is special somehow, what would Nancy Pelosi call it? The spark of human divinity, um, has been extinguished in a lot of these cultures, unfortunately. So you're right that's how do you regain that?
Yeah, well, a lot of that has only come about in the last 60 or 70 years as a result of the Saudis just sending out Wahhabi missionaries to convert the rest of the Islamic world to their particular brand of Wahhabist
Very
Sunni
virulent
Islam.
Islamism. Yeah. And then Iran got in the game,
Yeah, and then you
doing
get
the same thing with the Shias.
yeah. So it's it would be blasphemous to say it in any of those countries, but I'm not entirely sure that what they have is Islam. But I mean, don't get me wrong. Winston Churchill 100 years ago was talking about how backwards Islam was in terms of its concept of humanity and the human spirit. I mean, it's never been a particularly joyous religion. It really is a religion of duty.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, that's what Islam means, submission.
So it's one of those things that they're people just like us, but they just have a worldview that's hard to understand, and it's going to be interesting to see how that worldview superimposes itself on whatever kind of Syria comes after it. Because one of the arguments that they would make is that the entire Ba'athist movement was a movement of Western liberalism.
I mean, so is socialism.
Yeah, well, Baathism is a type of socialism.
Exactly.
So, I mean, we talk about the Enlightenment and the Enlightenment ideals. The taste of the Enlightenment they got was Ba'athist socialism. They basically got communism. They skipped right from feudalism to communism. They missed that 200
that
year
interregnum period.
that 150-year interregnum period where everybody just left everybody alone and tried to figure out what the right thing was. And look, communism itself didn't really get a foothold until the 20th century.
Right.
And
it was tried several times. It just never worked.
And they got the full dose of it. So, I mean, it's no wonder whenever we sit here and we spout off about liberalism and what have you in the West, I mean, for them, liberalism means one-party dictatorships where people are thrown into shredders.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, communists, socialists, uh, national socialists, fascists, they didn't believe in liberalism either. The idea that individuals can make their own choice. They're very communitarian. They think that every decision everybody makes should be made at the behest and for the good of the state. And just with Islam, it's the Islamic State, which is every Islamic nation.
Nothing outside the state, nothing against the state, everything within the state.
Exactly.
And Islam, and the funny thing is, communism was supposed to be this new, modern, scientific idea. And what it really is a return to a sort of religious fundamentalism.
Exactly. Well, Marx said it himself, that God is dead. I mean, well, I guess technically that was
Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yeah, Nietzsche. But he launched off of that. Marx and Engels did quite successfully. The scientific part didn't come in until after the 1848 revolutions, and it started off. I remember the reason they're called communists is because of
The Paris Commune of 1848.
not of 1848. It started with Babeuf in during the French Revolution in
Oh,
1796.
you know what? You're right. Yeah.
And remember, what was the first thing they did? They destroyed all the old traditions. They started renaming the days and the months and made up a new calendar. They started getting rid of
A new
words.
calendar.
They
They made up
just,
a new clock, for goodness sake.
yeah, that's right.
What time is it? 11D73? On the it's 1173 on the 18th of Thermidor. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So I mean, the whole concept behind it is to destroy the old, which is keeping us back, which is not letting us progress, which is not allowing the human spirit to fulfill itself.
Yeah, but the
You know,
irony of that is that it is a return to a type of religious fundamentalism. It just has it's a religious fundamentalism where the state takes the place of God.
it's a secular religion. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And it's actually pretty fucking futile too, at least in application. You got to divide between, and this is why the commies are always trying to say, well, true communism has never been
Yeah, it's
tried.
never been tried.
Because the theory and the practice are certainly different, but that's because the theory is so unworkable and so vulnerable that you have to force everybody to follow along. And people are instinctually not going to do that, at least in the West.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what follows along in Syria over the next year or so, because we're in sort of untrod territory. Our expectations are, or were, that what we would see ushered in would be another Iran. I'm not entirely sure that's true now, but I don't know what we are going to see. I think we'll just have to watch and learn.
Well, it's sort of like, you know, what did Kissinger say when Iran and Iraq were at war? Couldn't they both lose?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it'll be interesting to see, just as it'll be interesting to see if the United States government takes the $10 million reward off of this guy's head too. Well, again, we'll see. Let me switch both tone and topic here, and let's take a little look at this Defense Department briefing from this past week. It's a very short clip, shorter even than it appears here.
These are not U.S. military drones. Again, this is being investigated by local law enforcement. What our initial assessment here is that these are not drones or activities coming from a foreign entity or adversary.
You're telling me we don't know?
And the rest of it is just, additional stuff. But all of these drone sightings over New Jersey and other places, I think one of the most likely things is that, and I don't know how the story got started, where it comes from. These things often take on a life of their own. But it does strike me that the human brain is a pattern-making machine. And if you go looking for things expecting to see pattern X, then whatever you see tends to be pattern X, right? We tend to believe things that we think. Or believe things that we want to think. So the first question I have to ask is always, okay, are these things even drones? What is it that we're actually seeing? And, for the DOD to come out and well, that's a whole nother subject. Let's not even talk about the DOD. So for now, if you were giving odds, what would you say that these are people misidentifying airplanes?
Not good. I've seen the videos. They don't fly like airplanes. They're way too low. They don't move like airplanes. Um, some of them seem large. I've heard as big as like a van or a car. They don't seem that big to me, but I'm not seeing them with the naked eye. I'm seeing it through video.
Okay, sure. And yet, we keep getting pictures like this. Okay, that's a helicopter.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that is obviously a helicopter. I've got red and green port and starboard
Exactly.
position lights, and I've got formation lights on the bottom. There's the rotor. There's this one here. Here's a drone. No, it's not. It's a Cessna citation.
Right.
So the first level of, and by the way, there's another one here, and I don't know if I bookmarked it or not. Oh, I certainly hope I did. Hold on, because we have to watch this. This one. I love this one. This guy.
I'm telling you that they're not moving. They're staying stationary.
No, they're moving towards you.
Yeah,
They're
you know why
hovering.
they're not moving? It's because you're standing in front of the runway at Reagan National.
It is moving.
No, it's not.
It looks like it.
Yeah, but they're not moving. That's an airplane. Hang on.
Which one? The one closest to the Capitol?
I mean, this guy
Hang on,
has
let me zoom out a little bit. Yeah,
This guy
that's an
has-
airplane.
convinced himself that he is
That's
seeing
an airplane.
drones.
You can see it moving.
Right?
The one to the right.
Just because he is in front
over
of
here.
aircraft that are landing at Reagan
Over
National,
here, that's an
and
airplane.
he's in
Okay?
front of the runway, and so
Yeah,
they're
and
coming
that's what I'm
straight
saying,
at
like,
him.
When you look to the left of the Capitol,
So
those are
the
not
the,
moving.
the very first filter that we have to get past is, as soon as I hear there are drones, I'm going to go looking for drones, and anything I
Right.
see that I can't immediately explain is a drone. When
Right.
in point of fact, rather than being a drone, it is a Cessna citation.
Right.
Right? So there you go. That's a Cessna citation. Look, there are the jet engines. There is the red strobe light on the bottom. These are their landing or takeoff lights. And actually, if you watch the video, there's a video at this, which we're not going to take time to watch, but if you look around at the ends of the wings, you can begin to see, because these are landing lights and they are bright, but you can begin to see around the edge red on one side and green on the other.
Green on the other, right.
Right? So, okay, those are airplanes. So all of these reports that are coming in, the first question is, okay, how many of them are something weird? And how many of them are just airplanes and people are freaked out?
Sure. When you get an unexplained phenomena like this, there's going to be a lot of type 2 errors. So there's going to be over inclusive of things that really don't fit the category, but because they're not readily known to the observer, they're going to be thrown into the category, which muddies, the sample study. But there are certainly legitimate videos, and there's also the fact that like a small airport in New Jersey was shut down because of drone activity.
Hell, they shut
Why-
down
why would they shut
LaGuardia
down?
on Friday for
Yeah.
like an hour. Okay, so then there's videos like this. What exactly are we seeing here?
And my first thought would be a helicopter of some sort, but
But the rotor would be on top.
it's that a spider dropped down on me.
So, I mean,
Well, yeah, but unless it's going at a weird angle, or this is being taken from a weird angle, I don't know.
yeah, so you get this kind of thing, and it just doesn't look, and you can't, I mean, and we don't
It doesn't
see,
look normal.
we don't see red and green formation lights. We see this weird spinning thing, but it seems to be spinning too slow to be a rotor blade. And why would I see a rotor blade if I was below a helicopter anyway?
Right.
But
But it also doesn't look like a drone.
well, that's the thing. None of these things look like a drone. I mean, we have this idea of drones as just being these propeller-driven craft. They aren't always. I mean, the Reaper drone is freaking jet-powered drone, and
Right.
you launch them off a carrier.
Those are pretty large, though. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're the size of a fighter plane, so they're obviously aircraft shapes. But it's interesting, the DoD's response. 'Cause, I mean, you know, the DoD, I mean, they're the size of a fighter plane, so they're obviously aircraft shapes. But it's interesting, the DoD's response. 'Cause, I mean, you know, the DoD, I mean, they're the size of a fighter plane, so they're obviously aircraft shapes. But They're not ours. They are not from a foreign adversary. And there's no apparent danger. And we don't know what they are. Okay, all four of those things can't be true.
Right.
If you don't know what they are, you cannot definitively say there's no danger. And frankly, if you don't know what they are, you might be able to say they're not ours, but if you don't know what they are, how do you know that they're not from a foreign power? So
which makes me think that they're ours.
Yeah, which of course makes me think that they're ours. There is a guy, we're not going to look at his video, it's 9 minutes long, we're not going to waste the time on it, but he's a guy that says he is a drone manufacturer in Kansas, in Wichita, and that what he has heard, because apparently he says he does some stuff for the government, and in his video he's actually standing in front of some sort of what appears to be a relatively advanced drone, a large one in any event. And he says that what he's heard, and here we go into some guy on the internet said what I heard.
My cousin's sister's boyfriend said.
Yeah, is that at some point some ex-Soviet nuclear warhead has fallen out of sight. And that what these drones are doing is they are performing searches at night to see if they can pinpoint the location of this warhead.
Okay, that sounds preposterous.
Sure, it does. However, if you were going to be searching for a warhead, you would search for it at night because that is when it is least likely to be moving, because presumably the people who are moving it want to move it under the cover of much traffic, making it much harder to find. Plus, they got to sleep.
It's also less alarming to the public.
Sometime. And the other thing, you can't, if you're the Department of Defense, if you are searching for some nuclear warhead, you can't just walk out and say, hey, we think there's an ex-Russian nuclear warhead floating around in the country somewhere. We're looking for it, but don't worry your pretty little head about it.
Right. You wouldn't report that to the New York Times, news desk.
The amount of panic that would follow is almost unimaginable. Mm-hmm. You can't just say there's an unknown nuclear weapon floating around the country. We're looking for it. Good luck out there, folks. So, I mean, it does at least have the explanatory. I mean, it's plausible that if something like that were to happen, this is what we would expect to see. The military would be having surveillance drones up. They would be there at night, and they would be, I don't know how you would sniff for a nuclear weapon because presumably the warhead is so well shielded to prevent you from seeing the radiation.
Something unique about the encasement. Or, about the transportation or something. Yeah, see?
Yeah.
He agrees with me.
He seems to agree very vociferously. But
that's my dog.
Yeah, but that does make sense. If the government was doing something like that, and they wouldn't tell us. They simply wouldn't because the panic would be too much.
And they would give us a really stupid explanation, like totally not ours.
Well, look,
but we also know it's nothing to worry about.
Well, like they did have one of the guys that was talking in front of Congress, and he says, look, most of this stuff is just misidentifying aircraft.
And that's the problem with the type 2 errors, right? Is that once you introduce enough noise in there, the noise can take over the signal.
So one of the things I was thinking, because Governor Hochul in New York, and also the governor of New Jersey, whose name slips my mind at the moment.
Murphy?
Yeah, I believe so. Have been telling the federal government, you have got to get down here and figure out what is going on.
Yeah, people are freaking out.
Because people are freaking out. And at some point, some governor is going to realize, oh, wait a second, I have about a division of Army and a wing of Air National Guard that are just sitting around doing nothing. Why don't I start shooting these things down? Which, if it's U.S. military activity, that's the last thing the federal government wants. But it does raise the question, okay, if you can confirm that these things are drones and not like civilian aircraft, why not shoot them down and then send the wreckage off to the state police crime lab? They'll figure out what
You
it
notice
is
they're
pretty
not
quick.
doing this down in Alabama. Skeeter, I got one.
Yeah, New Jersey has, I believe I saw the figures, New Jersey has like a 14% firearms ownership rate.
Right.
I'm going to assume that percentage is substantially higher in Alabama.
Yeah. That might be the percent that doesn't own any firearm of any sort.
Yeah. So again, now nobody cared about our Syria conversation apparently, but now everybody wants to talk about drones. So I'm assuming that there are many false reports with possible military drone swarm maneuver testing being a secondary option. And that was followed with, but why would they fly over bases if looking? Okay, well, first of all, they would be flying over bases if it was the U.S. military testing mass drone formations.
Right.
Because where else would you test them but over a military installation? At least you have a reasonable assurance of being relatively free from prying eyes. Although, once you're up 3,000 or 4,000 feet in the sky, there's going to be a lot more prying eyes than you want. But still, I mean, you take off and land from a military base and nobody can really tell what's going on, certainly not at ground level or anything below 1,000 feet or so.
I would think there would be a sit rep to the the local airports and radar detectors. I mean,
Yeah,
there would have to be, I would think there'd be some sort of, ignore these.
Actually, if they're below 400 feet, they don't have to tell anybody.
That's true. But in the event that they go above that limit,
yeah,
you don't want to get them reported.
Yeah, well then, but then what you do is you have your ops center call the local FAA control center and say, ignore all aerial activity over the base.
These are not the drones you're looking for.
Yeah, and they will do it. You just say, okay, this is a military airspace activity. It is secret. You can't tell anybody what's going on. So,
although, I mean, if you want to test these things, why aren't you doing it out in like the Arizona desert, or over like Kansas cornfields or something?
But again, then as you mentioned, we have over this past week shut down at least 2 separate airports.
That's what confuses me.
So third problem, a lot of people with drones want to be smartasses.
True.
And so they're going to want to fly their drones. Oh, now look at my drone flying up in the sky. Ooh, is it spooky? Because people are freaking stupid. And so
you think this is like a stonks thing where they try
how much of this is idiots copycatting it now? Oh, hey, look, I shut down the air. Now you'll never be able to tell anybody other than maybe your closest buddy, and if you do, you're stupid because you've just committed a felony. But
right,
hey, I shut down an airport for an hour. I shut down freaking LaGuardia for an hour.
The only thing that gives me pause about that idea is that from the size and capability of these drones, they're not like something you go buy at Best Buy.
Well, not if they're 4 or 5 feet long or 6 feet long. I mean, those are,
right.
You can go buy your DJI drone at Costco or whatever. But I mean, it's like what, 1.5 feet?
Yeah. I mean, you can get bigger
square
ones, but they're not that big.
Yeah.
And
maybe
they don't go that high.
Yeah. Maybe 2-3 feet max. And
their transmission level, radio transmission level, limit is pretty limited.
Yeah, and they can't really get more than a couple of 100 feet away from you before you run out of radar range and you lose control of them. And they don't have. It's like you can fly these things for 8 hours either. Those batteries.
That's the other thing.
Those batteries are good for 10, maybe 15 minutes, and they're done. And those are for the little DJI drones. I mean,
right.
At some point you have to do the weight battery power calculation. How big of a battery do I need to keep a 6-foot long drone in the air for 30 minutes, 40 minutes.
Right.
That's
There's
a
a
lot
reason you don't have a 200-gallon gas tank on your car.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, technically, there's no reason why you couldn't, other than suspension.
It's a waste, right?
But I mean, technically, you could. Hell, they have 18-wheelers that drag around, tanks full of gasoline and deliver it.
That's true.
Technically, there's no reason why you can't just siphon off that gasoline to,
and you're going to get better gas mileage as it gets emptier.
Yeah. It's just, it is so weird, and there is so much noise around it, because you've got copycats who have drones, because at this point thousands of people have drones and they're flying them. You've got the military who do have drones who fly them. You've got people who are just seeing aircraft that they think are drones. Look, it's not even moving. Yes, it is, you moron. I don't know how you separate the wheat from the chaff on this thing. And by the way, you say, hey, what about all these drones around military bases? I was a military policeman. Do you know how often you have curiosity, looky-loo idiots who want to get onto the military base just to see what's there because they think they're going to see the top secret UFO shit because they're morons?
I look at Area 51.
Oh, yeah. People are going out to Area 51 and getting picked up all the time. The guys that work out there constantly have to patrol the desert so that when somebody gets close to the fence, they just drive up a Humvee up over the hill just to let you know, hey, we're looking at you.
You really don't want to do this.
Because we know what you're about to do, you idiot. And I just don't know how you figure this out.
Well, and
I don't know what the military or the FBI or whatever, I don't know what they're doing to figure it out because they aren't saying anything. That's the
that's
weird
just
thing.
it. That's what I was going to say, is that the asymmetrical information, they have to know stuff. They're not telling us, and now we have to guess at why they're not telling us.
Well, here's an interesting little theory that I saw. The current crop of drone regulations is about to come up for expiration.
I did see that. That was an interesting theory.
And so is this some sort of psyop to get everybody scared of drones so that they can crack down?
Think of the children.
Yeah, a little harder on drone regulation and be even more restrictive. I think, what is it? One country basically killed the entire drone industry in that country simply by saying, oh, you want to fly a drone? Well, you're going to need to get a pilot's license.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a second. Like a real pilot's license? Like to fly an airplane? Oh, yes.
How do I fly a drone?
Okay, never mind. I guess I'll put the drone away because, it's not cheap to get a civilian pilot's license and a solo in an aircraft.
Yeah, it's not cheap in money or time.
No. But I mean, that's a good way of just killing the drone industry, just saying, okay, yeah, you can fly all the drones you want. All you got to do is just get a pilot's license.
And the proposed reauthorization of this act, we don't know everything that it includes yet. There's some speculation that there's a lot of rather nefarious or potentially nefarious things. I mean, think about like the Patriot Act for the air, essentially.
Yeah, so this could all be some sort of massive psyop by government agencies just to get people spooked
Get them all riled up.
So that they can come and say, hey, we can fix this.
We need this. We absolutely need this legislation.
Yeah, I mean, you're scared about these drones. We gotta really crack down on this drone thing.
That could even explain why they're doing it over over New Jersey and New York, who would obviously be much more sympathetic to anything that's going to control their skies after 9/11.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine a couple of bureaucrats sitting in a conference room and saying, hey, If we shut down LaGuardia, you think the New York Times would write about it?
What if we leaked it?
Yeah, and then the statements that they've made, and that little video clip that I showed you is followed by a congressman who's just asking people from the FBI, "What is this?" And the guy at the FBI says, "Yeah, we don't know." He says, "Are you telling me that we know nothing?" Yes.
Yeah,
That's
I think when this whole thing started coming up, you and I were texting about this. Like, what the fuck? They don't know anything. They're giving us definitive answers that it's not us, it's not bad guys. There's no danger.
And we
Okay,
don't
well,
and we don't know what they are. But we do know it's not us,
you can't have
not
all
bad guys.
four of those things.
Yeah, but it's not bad guys, it's not dangerous, it's not us. And we don't know what it is. So don't worry your pretty little head about it.
Right.
I don't know what to say to that other than all four of those things can't possibly be true.
No.
If you don't know, you can't make any assurances at all.
You can pick three.
Well, not even a full three, actually. You can pick maybe two, depending on which one you pick.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And if the answer you pick is I don't know, you can only pick that one. You can't
That's
pick.
it.
You can't
That's
pick.
all you can pick.
Yeah, you can't pick.
Well, you could pick.
I don't know.
We don't
and
know
then
what they
choose
are,
something
but they're
else.
not ours.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's conceivable that you can say, okay, we don't know what they are, and because we don't know what they are, we can rule out that they're ours. Because if they're ours, we would know what they were.
Right.
But you can't rule out foreigners. And then, of
I almost
course,
prefer they say, we know what they are, but we can't tell you.
yeah, that would make a lot. You know what? That would make a lot of this go away. All they'd have to come out and say, yes, we know what they are. Yes, we're aware of it. There is no danger whatsoever.
And the rest is classified.
The rest is classified. They don't even have to tell us that they're ours. All they have to do is say, these are classified operations and they pose no danger to the public. And that is all we're allowed to say.
That would have been much more preferable to this snow job we're getting, which is what makes me think that there's something else going on here.
But what could it possibly be? Something.
Well, now the world's our oyster, right? We can come up with probably 100 different ideas right now.
And I haven't even talked about.
Come up with 3.
By the way, I haven't even talked about aliens. We haven't.
Yeah, that's right. I knew that was going to come up.
We haven't even had to go there yet because there's so much confusion about everything else. We don't need to make it worse by bringing in the little green men, or let's ramp that up a little bit. It's not the little green men. It's us working in conjunction with the little green men.
Right.
Now we've just...
So just to get us on the record, are you a believer in aliens?
I do.
You're kind of agnostic about it.
I'm agnostic about it. If you show me,
like everything else.
Yeah. If you show me the available evidence, I will believe it. But do I believe it? No. Do I believe it's possible? Yes. Barely. You're going to have to get past general and special relativity to get from star X to here, which is going to raise a lot of questions. It may just be general and special relativity are wrong, but so far they look like they explain a lot. And by the way, if it is aliens and they do come here, what are we going to do about it? Nothing, because if they can do that, they look at our technology like a couple of chimpanzees banging rocks together. So there's nothing we could do. So, I don't worry about it. If they came here and wanted to kill us, there would literally be nothing we could do. They would be so far technologically beyond us, they might as well be wizards.
Now, I've actually seen a UFO. And I mean that specifically as an unidentified flying object. I was completely 100% sober. I was working in the woods. Saw this light hovering over the pine trees, which grow, they're fairly short. They only go to about 40, 45 feet. and it was hovering maybe another 15 or 20 feet above that, and it was kind of just floating along, stopped, and then it started to slowly move back and away. Could have been a weather balloon. It wasn't windy that night, but maybe there was some, wind moving above. I don't know. I
Well,
have no idea what it was. It didn't scare me. I didn't think it was something nefarious, right?
okay, what I saw scared me. I've seen, well, one of them scared me, one didn't, but I on two separate occasions when I was a kid, I saw things happening in the sky that I can't explain. One, I was 5 or 6. I was outside with some friends in the neighborhood, and one of the people that I was with, we were all kids. All of us were between, 5 and 8 years old, right? So I was quite young. But I just remember one of the guys looking up and saying, "What is that?" We looked up and there was this bright light, and it went across the sky, stopped, and then a whole bunch of smaller lights shot off in different directions, and then it went back the way it came and then just disappeared.
Yeah.
And we all said, "Okay, well, it's getting
was
late.
that?"
It's getting late. We have to go inside. It's dark." So we all left. Another time I was with my Boy Scout troop. We were on a camp out around Lake Houston. And again, it was one of those things of, what is that? We were just looking up at the sky. I imagine some of us were looking for the astronomy badges or whatever. We were just looking up in the sky, and there was this white light that just shot across and stopped. And then we noticed that following it, with recognition lights flashing and everything, was an aircraft. And the aircraft would get close to it, would do that, and the aircraft would slowly turn and try to head back toward it, and then it would shoot down, and the aircraft would turn. So it looked to me like something that was
Being chased.
being chased, but that was operating in a non-Einsteinian or non-Newtonian form of movement, was just zipping from point to point, and it would stop, and we would just go here, and you could just see it streak over here and then just stop, and you could see flashing lights, reds and greens, and strobes just turn slowly and start to head for it, and then the thing would just go zip and fly up there, and then at one point it just went phew, and just a streak just went across the sky, and this lonely, straggly airplane was just flying there. I'm assuming that because we were at Lake Houston, what it was one of the air defense alert fighters that were scrambled out of Ellington Air Force Base. They had a squadron of Voodoos out there, and so probably somebody launched a Voodoo to go take a look at it, and they never caught it. So I've seen things in the sky that I can't explain. So when we look at this, I don't know. But I do want to point out, inebriated Plutarch in chat, given how badly the people in charge handled the spy balloons, the public can hardly trust that the authorities will take the correct course of action in this case.
Yeah, I'm not. Oh, I'm glad
That is the problem.
he or she brought that up. Yeah, that is another thing. The mealy-mouthed responses and the obfuscation, the clear lying about it, and the way they handled those those Chinese balloons, which were surveillance.
You mean the spy balloons?
Right, they were surveillance balloons. We know that. But we didn't want to shoot it down over North Dakota because somebody might have gotten hurt. Who?
I mean,
least populated states.
Yeah, it's just, the entire phone book, red and yellow pages, is that thick. I know, I lived there. That's the phone book for North Dakota. There may be 200,000 people in North Dakota. The chances of shooting down something over that and having it hit anything
other than a cow.
No cows. Those are all wheat fields. Nobody's gonna herd cows in 70-degree below zero wind chill in North Dakota. You're just gonna harvest your wheat in October, and then you're just gonna sit in your nice warm farmhouse for 4 months until the whole winter blows over.
Yeah. So the duplicitousness of the federal government, it's just piss poor ability to manage communications in any sort of effective way. And I mean, just they can't even lie well. They're they're so bad at it.
Yeah. You see these government spokesmen, and it kind of reminds me of the old Saturday Night Live skit with Billy Crystal. Yeah, it was the planet Venus. That's it. Yeah.
That's
that's the ticket.
that wasn't Billy Crystal. That was John Levine. John
John Lovett.
Lovett. Yeah, that's it.
John Lovett.
That's it.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing. We don't believe anything the government says.
And why should we?
Because they never tell us
they're not
the truth.
giving us any. They have not given us a reason to in so long.
I mean, can you
Pretty much
imagine
my entire lifetime?
Can you imagine 70 years ago if we were seeing these things flying around SAC bases? Can you imagine the number of machine guns that would be firing into the air by Curtis LeMay, ordering everything flying within a mile of a SAC base to be shot down?
Yeah, before Jersey became a completely lib state, when Orson Welles was reading The War of the Worlds, doing the broadcast, about all these aliens landing in New Jersey. I'm pretty sure somebody could have gotten shot there.
Yeah, well, see, but that just illustrates the problem with this drone panic. Once you hear on the news that, hey, there's a whole bunch, or not on the news, social media, because that's where this stuff really starts. And don't even get me started on social media. But once it starts on social media and you see it on Facebook or Twitter or Blue Sky, which I guess you'd only see it if you were a raging liberal, apparently, on Blue Sky. But once you see it on social media, well, then you begin looking for them. You begin talking about it. If you see anything you don't understand, you've automatically seen a drone because that's what you want to believe. And then ultimately it gets picked up by the mainstream media. And then once that happens, everybody's looking for drones. The water gets so muddied. So you go to the government and say, hey, unmuddy the water. What's going on? Hey, we don't know. It's not us, not foreigners, no danger. Don't worry your pretty little head about it.
Nothing to see here. Everything is fine.
Show's over, folks. Nothing to see here. Move along, citizen.
I mean, this is what happens in a low trust society, though. We used to have a very high trust, especially after World War II. We had a very, very high trust society. Not just in government institutions, but also in our fellow citizens. And well, as long as they were white. But we're relatively well off and predisposed well to each other and to our government officials. We thought the information we were getting was true. We thought it was reliable. That has degenerated into now it's like we don't trust anything anybody has to say.
And why should we? We know that the media has lied to us. ABC News, I wasn't going to talk about this, but I might as well because it's relevant. ABC News, apparently, rather than going through the discovery process, have decided that it would be a lot easier just to pay Donald Trump $15 million and publicly apologize for saying he was an adjudicated rapist.
And probably a lot less expensive. They could have spent the $50 million on lawyers,
because as
and
soon
then
as
had to pay like maybe $200 million.
Yeah, as soon as the email and text messages were made part of discovery, the proving of actual malice probably would have been real easy. Although most Americans don't know what actual malice means. In this case, it would have been real easy to prove.
Extremely easy.
But okay, we've been lied to. The whole Russia lied to. The Hunter Biden laptop. Hey, 50 intelligence officials say this is a bunch of Russian bullshit. So again, don't worry your pretty little head about it. It's funny how we're always told not to worry our pretty little heads about stuff that is actually happening. And
the most accurate and secure election ever.
Yeah. And you can believe as much of that as you want. And so we have a government, and of course now we know, after the Twitter files and stuff, that the government has been censoring stuff that was literally true, but they just didn't want to be out there because it wasn't a story that they wanted people to believe. They wanted people to believe the narrative. There is no trust in any of these institutions. And by the way, a large part of this is an outgrowth of something that Dwight D. Eisenhower talked about whenever he left office, and he talked about the dangers of the military-industrial complex, or what we've come to know as the national security state. The default response to everything now is, well, classify it. Classify it. Don't let anybody talk about it.
This is the basis of what, all the Jason Bourne movies, plenty of Tom Clancy novels. I mean, these are written long before, right? I mean, they took to heart when they were writing these series what Eisenhower said, and we're seeing it in spades now, especially with our intelligence agencies. What a misnomer! They can't get anything right. I mean, they're really good at spying on Americans, but they suck at getting information about what the hell's going on anywhere else in the world.
Or thanks to Obama now being legally authorized to propagandize Americans.
Yeah.
And lie to Americans. I mean, it's so, yeah, I don't believe anything that the government says, which is a problem. Because what if there was something that they could tell us, something that was dangerous, something where they needed our help? Why would we believe them?
Right, yeah, the boy who cried wolf.
Exactly. We are getting awfully close. You talked about high trust societies and low trust society. More and more, I am seeing evidence that the United States is turning into, and very rapidly, turning into a low trust society.
I think we're already there.
Our institutions lie to us. Our media lies to us. Our government lies to us.
Our government forces our doctors to lie to us, to spy on us. They force every government institution to pry into what we eat, what we drink, how our children are doing, what we do with them. Do we own guns? How often do you go to church? What kind of church? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous.
And one of the reasons why everybody has had such a cow about Elon Musk buying Twitter is the fact that he just won't censor conservatives at the drop of a hat anymore. And so now people are being exposed to things that they don't want to see. Or even worse, they're coming out with their, cool little statements and little facts that you just don't really want to accept, and then they just get blasted by community notes.
Yeah, those community notes are pretty good, actually, and they work both ways too. I mean, it's not just conservatives that do that.
Yeah, but the problem is it's not. But the problem is that it is a rage over not having control over Twitter anymore and not being able to control narratives. You can control narratives in the media, and the media is perfectly willing, by the way, to cooperate with the control over those narratives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we said it before. We talked about it before, that, and we've talked about it a lot, but I mean, the reason that one of the first things that authoritarian regimes go after is the ability to share information with each other with impunity, is because they don't want the naysayers to know that each other exist. We were talking about Romania, and like finally one guy said, "Hey, boo! Wait, there are other people like me."
Yeah, and that's
they
all
don't
it
like
took.
that.
And that's the trouble. That's all it takes to kick off a preference cascade, is for people to learn, oh, I'm not alone. Right. Wait a second. I'm not the asshole. That guy on the stage is.
Right.
And
they don't want competing narratives because they can't support theirs with any sort of logic or reason or even argument.
And as coming from chat again from Jim McGinnis, it's as if every government spokesman was aspiring to become Baghdad Bob. And the trouble is they are aspiring to become Baghdad Bob, but
absolutely,
they're doing so in a way that is every bit as believable as Baghdad Bob.
Well, yeah, it's gotten to the point where people see through the madness, right? And I think that this election was a big signal about that. Despite all the propaganda, despite all the lawfare, despite the near constant negative, over the top, ridiculous statements about Trump, who has plenty of problems. They could have just talked about those. Um, no, they chose to go way overboard and to make it into some sort of existential crisis.
32 felony counts.
Of which nobody can name exactly what they are.
Yeah, and it's easy to get to 32 counts when you have a single act, but then you count every single check as a separate felony count. Sure. By the way, not even sure that that conviction, I'm not sure that will even stand.
Well, I don't think it will, which is why they are now stalling it, a final decision, because it can't be appealed until there's a final decision.
Well, they did have that one appeal before the New York State Court of Appeals.
That was an interlocutory appeal, and so that was during the middle of the case, and that was over a specific issue that needed to be included in the case. Until there's a sentence,
yeah, it's not official.
You can't appeal it. It's not finished.
Yeah, the trial is going on, so we'll just delay the trial, and that's what Alvin Bragg is trying to do, delay the trial until 2028 or 2029.
I mean,
okay,
and who's going to give a fuck at that point?
Yeah, well, at that point, when Trump leaves office, he's never coming back. I mean, so we'll just drop it. He's never going to see a day in jail. It accomplished its, well, I was about to say it accomplished.
It actually backfired.
I was about to say it accomplished its political purpose, but Trump will be president next month. So I guess it didn't even accomplish its purpose. So why?
It accomplished its political narrative purpose, but that political narrative was a loser.
Yeah, and nobody trusts. And look, it didn't help during the debates either that in both cases, the moderators had their fingers on the scale so heavily in terms of fact checking and things like that, that Joe Biden and then Kamala Harris were just getting away with the most outrageous lies, and nobody said a word. And
my favorite was Joe Biden. Every time like Trump nailed him, he would be like,
"Are you gonna let him get away with that?"
You're right. He'd automatically look at the moderators, be like, "You can't let him say that."
Yeah, so I just don't. I this drone thing really bothers me. Not because I'm afraid or because I think it's the aliens that are coming to kill us. It's just the thing that bothers me is the cavalier attitude that the government is having. And I think what is at least in some sense hilarious is the fact that like Governor Hochul in New York is now just demanding the federal government do something. Don't just stand there. Help us figure this out.
Well, wasn't one of the things that she recommended was that reauthorization act?
Yeah. Well, look, as I texted you, I think earlier this week, if I was the governor, I would call out the National Guard. And if we
National Guard, yeah.
And if they
got the equipment to shoot that shit down.
And if we had a drone that could not be identified, shoot it down and ship it off to the State Police Crime Lab. They'll be able to pull the manufacturer's information, and with that, probably
you could find out everything.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you really want to figure this out, you can. But nobody wants to figure it out. And of course, we're seeing the same thing. Well, you can't shoot them down because, they could fall and somebody could get hurt. Well, we have an unknown apparent threat that is flying around in our skies. And if we do nothing, how do we know there's not a threat already?
Well, we also have the technology to actually capture them with nets. I mean, it sounds a little Batman-ish.
Oh, yeah, but we can. And we
absolutely have that technology.
And by the way, if they are controlled from anywhere, we have the technology to simply jam the radio signal and drop the thing down. Now, if you come out and tell me, okay, well, we tried the jammers and it didn't affect anything. And we tried to see them on radar and they don't appear. And we sent an aircraft out after it and the aircraft couldn't lock onto it. Okay, now we got a mystery that I might be interested in talking about. But we're not.
Well, at least then we know that they're not private, unless it's like, Lex Luthor has come up with some like amazing plan.
Yeah, but
sue for
they keep
$1 million.
Yeah, but they keep saying, well, we got the FBI on this. So what are they going to do?
What's the FBI going to do?
Walk around in the street with their Glock and look menacing? This is not an FBI matter. This is an FAA DOD matter, and they're the people who have the equipment to shoot it down. And if the DOD won't, you've got a National Guard. You can call them up. You don't need anybody's permission.
As governor, that's right. And actually, the president has that ability too, under certain circumstances.
Sure, but governors have it all the time.
All the time. That's right.
And so, Kathy Hochul going out demanding the feds. Why? You're the governor. You have the New York National Guard. You've got the Air Guard, and you got the Army National Guard.
In her defense,
she may be too stupid to understand that she has the Guard. So, yeah, that's true. But it's a weird mystery, and the government is not doing anything to put it to rest or to assure us that they're looking into it or anything else. And with all of that in mind, I think my number one suspicion is that it's the government doing something, and they just don't want to tell us about it because it's classified. And
I'll be honest.
I'm open to being convinced.
With that. I am okay with that. I wish they would be a little more, discreet about it. But I do agree that for national security reasons, we can't know everything that our military is doing. I mean, somebody should know. The Senate Select Committee, for example, they should know what the hell's going on. It is a civilian-controlled military, after all.
Yeah, well, technically,
I mean, these mealy-mouthed, it just, everything suggests that there's something going on here that is not on the up and up.
Oh, and by the way, it didn't even, well, it's amazing when you start thinking about this, how it relates to other things. So if there is this nuclear weapon, or it doesn't have to be, it could be chemical, it could be anything.
It's a MacGuffin.
Yeah, but let's say we're looking for the MacGuffin. You know what would help not having to worry about MacGuffins? Having a secure border.
Ah, that might help.
Then at least if there are MacGuffins out there, you're reasonably assured that they're not getting across the border.
Especially if they're from some nefarious country, say Iran or Russia. They're sneaking across the southern border with, tons of cash on them and the means to pay for this stuff and support
fentanyl.
It. I mean, and fentanyl, yeah. Yeah, fentanyl be easier to convert into cash once you got in. Yeah, absolutely. Or fucking diamonds. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. As long as it can be converted into cash to buy these sorts of things. Now, I would imagine that there are probably some extensive background checks to get the sorts of drones that we're, I think, reasonably suspecting that they are. Would create some other issues, but again, that's just a money thing eventually.
Yeah, but I mean, there are a lot of other things that that we can tie into this and talk about.
So now we come up with like 10 conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I know, and the trouble is they're all equally as likely.
How do you eliminate it?
Yeah, I mean,
and that's the problem.
It is equally as likely as this is just a bunch of people who just don't know what they're talking about and who are thinking it's drones because they can't tell the difference between a Cessna Citation and a drone. There's too much noise And well, there's too much noise and there's not enough effort to cut through the noise. And it's either because the government knows what it is and doesn't want us to know, or the government simply doesn't care, which I think is worse.
Yeah. And I don't think we need to pick an either or there.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, it could very well be both. So, I just wanted to do that. And by the way, just so that you know, I've already written and I've already created the cover image for tonight's podcast, which is titled "Game of Drones."
I love it.
Michael, have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, you too, buddy.
And for all of the rest of you, you have a great week as well. You've been watching the Observations podcast. It's a pleasure bringing the podcast to you. We'll see you again next time. So long.